Hey guys, thanks for stopping in today. I just wanted to take a minute and wish everyone a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, whatever it is you celebrate. Thank you so much. I've got 3 Christmas kind of geared towards Christmas stories coming up. So sit back, relax, get you a cup of hot chocolate or a cup of coffee, whatever your thing is. Gather around the fire, get warm, and enjoy. Andrew awoke in the darkness. It was a noise from downstairs that woke him up, a kind of subtle rustling and creaking of the floor. He glanced to the chunky glow in the dark clock on a bedside table. It was later than he imagined, nearly 5:30 in the morning. His drowsiness soon wore off as he remembered it was Christmas morning. Like any other excited 4-year-old, he tugged off the covers and crept from his bed. Ignoring the coldness of the wooden floor on his bare feet, he headed to the door. As Andrew left his bedroom, he clicked the door shut behind him. Even in the faint light, he could see the closed white doors of his parents' and sister's room, grinning to himself as he realized he was the first one awake. Andrew gingerly wandered downstairs into the darkness, clinging to the banister for guidance as he tested each step with his freezing toes. He missed out the one that creaked, nearly hugging the wooden rail as he lunged down. To his surprise, yellow light seeped out from under the closed lounge door. Andrew stopped in his tracks. "Santa," he thought, as he grabbed the door handle and turned it, pushing it open in one swift, excited movement. "Oh, Andrew, honey, you're up early," said his mother, Michelle, as she put down a present onto the coffee table and plastic supermarket bag full of other gifts onto the floor beside it. She went over to him and kissed him on the top of the head. Andrew looked past her. But where's Santa? Why are you putting the presents out?" Simon, the boy's father, was quick to respond. "Santa's very busy, you know, buddy. You just missed him. He left all these bags, but he's on such a tight schedule he didn't have time to lay the presents out." Andrew thought over his father's reply, but it seemed logical enough to him and he smiled. "I understand, Daddy." Andrew wriggled past his mother to look at the presents. Eagerly, he scanned over them, but there was no sign of what he was looking for. What Andrew wanted most for Christmas was an electric scooter. He'd seen one, bright red and shiny, in the toy shop in town and had his heart set on it ever since. His mother had said it was too expensive at £250, but his father had told him to wait and see what Santa would bring. Andrew was a little disheartened, but he hoped that maybe Santa had left it somewhere else and his parents hadn't put it out for him to see just yet. He picked up a small gift from the table near where he stood. "To Andrew," read the tag. "Can I open one now, Mommy, before Lily wakes up?" he asked, clutching it and studying the reindeer pattern of the wrapping paper. His parents glanced at each other. "Soon, sweetie. Not yet. Wait for your sister. Daddy and I still have more presents left in the bags." Michelle smiled. "Oh, okay, Mommy," said Andrew as he put it back. "See you in the morning." He turned and left the room, pulling the door shut behind him as he headed for the stairs. "It's Christmas," yelled a voice that once again woke Andrew from his slumber. His grinning sister Lily was in the doorway. "You should see all the presents." Andrew almost flew from his bed, leaving the blankets on the floor as he darted from his room with his older sister. The pair ran downstairs into the lounge. Andrew knew his parents were right. They definitely did have more presents left to arrange. The table was covered with them, and they were heaped by the fireplace under the Christmas tree. Simon and Michelle sat in their armchairs, still in dressing gowns, sipping their Christmas Bucks fizz. "Go on, kids," Simon smiled as Andrew and Lily began tearing into their presents. Andrew had saved the big box until last. All the other presents had been opened. The floor was littered with bows, tags, and torn scraps of wrapping paper. Lily was preoccupied setting up her new Nintendo DS game. Andrew's last present was under the tree, wrapped in dark metallic blue paper with silver glittered snowflakes. Andrew crawled down and pulled it out, sliding it towards himself as he sat cross-legged on the floor. He giggled to himself a little, the excitement making his hands shake as he found the edge of the paper and began stripping it off. It could only be one thing. As he ripped off the paper, the plain black box inside was revealed. Andrew paused, staring at it, his head tilted to one side with scraps of the wrapping paper still in his hands. He wondered why his parents put the scooter in there. "Open it then, honey," his mother said from behind. Andrew grabbed the lid and box and tugged it off. The box was full of colored pens and paints, stickers and glitter, pieces of card and pots of glue. The lid of the box still tight between his hands. It was an art set. "Daddy and I saw how much you liked doing art at school. You can make things at home now, too." Andrew stared down into the box, putting the lid to one side. He rooted through it. "Thank you," he said, trying to sound as cheery as he could, but in reality, he was trying not to cry. There were no other presents. Tears prickling in his eyes, Andrew put the lid back on the box and tucked it under the tree, crawling back onto the sofa next to Lily. Andrew couldn't stop thinking about the scooter for the rest of the day. He made a gingerbread house with his sister and they all went for a walk down by the river, but he still thought about it. It was even more on his mind as he ate Christmas dinner. Lily had finished quickly, disappearing back to play with her new toys and games, yet Andrew just sat pushing a cold piece of stray carrot around in gravy on his plate. "What's wrong, buddy?" asked his father, crouching down next to him. Andrew feared sounding ungrateful. "I just wanted that scooter, Daddy. All those other things are really nice, but..." He didn't say any more, just returning to nudging the carrot around with his fork. His father ruffled his short dark hair and gave him half a smile. "Maybe Santa just forgot this time. He has so much to remember, you know. Maybe we could fix up your bike sometime. I'm sure that wheel's easy to replace. You could play on that instead if you wanted," he offered. Andrew gave him a weak smile back. "I know," continued his father. "How about you make some nice Christmas pictures for Granny using your new art things?" Andrew nodded and the pair headed towards the lounge, his father patting him on the back. Lily was silent as she played her new virtual zoo game. "Look at all my monkeys, Andy. I bought 12 and it cost all my coins," she tittered, nudging her little brother and pointing at the pixelated animals on the screen. Andrew looked briefly, his eyes scanning across the dull image before slumping back on the sofa. Lily went back to her game without another word. Michelle was out in the kitchen, cleaning the plates. Leaning on a piece of cardboard from the box of a toy, Andrew colored in a picture of his missing scooter he had drawn with his new art supplies. It was bright red like the one in the shop, and he had put glitter on the silver handlebars to make it sparkle. The TV played a seemingly looping playlist of the same Christmas tunes Andrew had been bored of by the middle of the month. The drawing was finished. It wasn't exactly perfect, but it was the best he could do. "Do you like my picture, Daddy?" he asked, holding it up. Murmured Simon. He didn't look up from his laptop where he was tapping away as usual, occasionally glancing at his stack of papers on the arm of the chair beside him. "My picture for Granny." "Very nice. Next time we go over, you can put it on her fridge," he replied, only looking at the drawing for a second. Andrew sighed. He thought maybe his father would at least stop working for a little while on Christmas Day. Andrew knew that his mother worked at the care home for the elderly people, but he didn't understand what his father did. Almost every evening, Simon sat typing up from an old spiral-bound notebook or from sheets dug out of the dusty dog-eared folders. Sometimes, Andrew peeked at the documents that his father had forgotten to put away in the safe he kept in the kitchen, but the long, complicated words meant nothing to him. Andrew slipped the pens back into the art box, taking one last look at the picture of his missing scooter before laying it face down on the table. Huddled up under his blankets in his new pajamas that night, Andrew tried to get some sleep. He hugged a soft fish toy that his sister had bought him. Why did Santa forget my scooter? He wondered. Am I on the naughty list? That must be why. That time I knocked Mummy's tea on the floor, and when I stole that cake from Lily's lunchbox, and when I lost my math homework. He thought tiredly over everything he had done wrong over the year, his drowsy fears almost bringing him to tears. That's why Santa forgot it. I'm a bad boy, he said to himself gloomily as sleep overcame him. The sound of footsteps downstairs woke him later that night. He stared around, blinking around his pitch-black bedroom. The clock said it was only 5:10 this time. All of the worries of the night before drained away as Andrew sat up in bed. Santa must have remembered. He really did just forget my scooter. I'm not on the naughty list, he thought with glee as he scampered from his bed. He crept downstairs as he did the night before, one step at a time and taking care to miss the creaky stair. He almost ran down the hall towards the lounge. The door was open and the light was off. I wonder if he heard me coming. Andrew sat down in his mother's armchair. There was a little lamp beside the chair which Andrew switched on. The room was illuminated in a yellow glow. Andrew took a chocolate from the tin on the floor, pulling off the wrapper and scrunching it into a ball before popping the chocolate into his mouth. He scanned the room as his eyes adjusted to the light. There was no sign of the scooter. Just then, a soft murmur made him sit bolt upright in the chair. It came from the kitchen. Andrew peered down the hall from where he sat, switching off the light. Maybe Daddy's talking to Santa about my scooter? As he tiptoed past the dining room, he noticed the door was open too. The doors in the house were always left shut. Andrew stopped by the edge of the kitchen door frame. A gust of December air brushed against him. Andrew shivered and hugged himself. The front door was open a crack, swaying. Santa? He asked out loud, his quiet, trembling voice fracturing the silence. He peered into the kitchen. Dim light from the street flooded into the room. A figure dressed in black was hunched by an open cabinet, pawing through it. There were papers all over the floor. Andrew gasped in surprise, and the figure shot its gaze around at him. Human eyes met his. Andrew was frozen on the spot, quivering as the hooded man just stared back at him. The orange street lamps outside gleamed off the blade of a knife in the man's hand. He wore thick winter gloves, and a scarf covered the bottom of his face. A chipped crowbar lay beside him. He was surrounded by files and stacks of paper. His father's work that had been pulled from his broken-into safe under the sink. That's what they must have come for. The only sound Andrew could make was a small, frightened squeak as he backed away from the figure. A black van he had never seen before was parked up on the street outside. He could feel a presence behind him, and before he even had the chance to turn, a gloved hand shot round from behind him and pressed its palm over his mouth. It was the middle of November when we arrived at Martindale and found the place anything but romantic or pleasant. The walks were wet and sodden, the trees were leafless. There were no flowers save for a few late pink roses blooming in the garden. It had been a wet season, and the place looked miserable. Claire would not ask Alice down to keep her company in the winter months, as she had intended, and for myself, the Cronsons were still absent in New Norfolk, where they meant to spend Christmas with old Miss Cronson, now recovered. Altogether, Martindale seemed dreary enough, and the ghost stories we had laughed at while sunshine flooded the room became less unreal when we had nothing but blazing fires and wax candles to dispel the gloom. They became more real also when servant after servant left us to seek situations elsewhere, when noises grew frequent in the house, when we ourselves, Claire and I, with our own ears heard them tramp, tramp, the banging and the clattering which had been described to us. My dear reader, you doubtless are free from superstitious fancies. You pooh-pooh the existence of ghosts and only wish you could find a haunted house in which to spend the night, which is all very brave and praiseworthy, but wait till you are left in a dreary, desolate old country mansion, filled with the most unaccountable sounds, without a servant, with none save an old caretaker and his wife, who, living at the extremest end of the building, heard nothing of the tramp, tramp, bang, bang going on at all hours of the night. At first, I imagined the noises were produced by some evil-disposed persons who wished, for purposes of their own, to keep the house uninhabited, but by degrees Claire and I came to the conclusion the visitation must be supernatural, and Martindale by consequence untenantable. Still, being practical people, unlike our predecessors, not having money to live where and how we liked, we decided to watch and see whether we could trace any human influence in the matter. If not, it was agreed we were to pull down the right wing of the house and the principal staircase. For nights and nights we sat up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, Claire engaged in needlework, I reading with a revolver lying on the table beside me, but nothing, neither sound nor appearance rewarded our vigil. This confirmed my first ideas that the sounds were not supernatural, but just to test the matter, I determined on Christmas Eve, the anniversary of Mr. Jeremy Lester's disappearance, to keep watch myself in the red bed chamber. Even to Claire, I never mentioned my intention. At about 10, tired out with our previous vigils, we were each retired to rest. Somewhat ostentatiously, perhaps, I noisily shut the door of my room, and when I opened it a half an hour afterwards, no mouse could have pursued its way along the corridor with greater silence and caution than myself. Quite in the dark, I sat in the red room. For over an hour, I might as well have been in my grave for anything I could see in the apartment. But at the end of the time, the moon rose and cast strange lights across the floor and upon the wall of the haunted chamber. Hitherto, I kept my watch opposite the window. Now I changed my place to a corner near the door, where I was shaded from observation by the heavy hangings on the bed and an antique wardrobe. Still, I sat on, but still no sound broke the silence. I was weary with many nights watching, and tired of my solitary vigil. I dropped at last into a slumber from which I was awakened by hearing the door softly opened. "John," said my sister, almost in a whisper. "John, are you here?" "Yes, Claire," I answered. "But what are you doing up at this hour?" "Come downstairs. They're in the oak parlor." I didn't need any explanation as to whom she meant, but crept downstairs after her, warned by an uplifted hand of the necessity for silence and caution. By the open door of the oak parlor, she paused, and we both looked in. There was the room we left in darkness overnight, with a bright wood fire blazing on the hearth, candles on the chimney piece, the small table pulled out from its accustomed corner, and 2 men seated beside it, playing at cribbage. We could see the face of the younger player. It was that of a man of about 25, of a man who had lived hard and wickedly, who had wasted his substance and his health, who had been, while in the flesh, Jeremy Lester. It would be difficult for me to say how I knew this, how in a moment I identified the features of the player with those of the man who had been missing for 41 years. 41 years, that very night. He was dressed in the costume of a bygone period. His hair was powdered, and round his wrist were the ruffles of lace. He looked like one who, having come from some great party, had sat down after his return home to play cards with an intimate friend. On his little finger there sparkled a ring. In the front of his shirt there gleamed a valuable diamond. There were diamond buckles in his shoes, and, according to the fashion of his time, he wore knee breeches and silk stockings, which showed off advantageously the shape of a remarkably good leg and ankle. He sat opposite the door, but never once lifted his eyes to it. His attention seemed concentrated on the cards. For a time there was utter silence in the room, broken only by the momentous counting of the game. In the doorway we stood, holding our breath, terrified and yet fascinated by the scene which was being acted before us. The ashes dropped on the hearth softly, and like the snow, we could hear the rustle of the cards as they were dealt out and fell upon the table. We listened to the count. 15-2, 15-4, and so forth. But there were no other words spoken until at length the player, whose face we could not see, exclaimed, "I win. The game is mine." Then his opponent took up the cards, sorted them over negligently in his hand, put them close together, and flung the whole pack in his guest's face, exclaiming, "Cheat! Liar! Take that!" There was a bustle and confusion, a flinging over of chairs and fierce gesticulation, and such a noise of passionate voices mingling that we could not hear the sentence which was uttered. All at once, however, Jeremy Lester strode out from the room in so great a hurry that he almost touched us where we stood, out of the room, and tramp up the staircase to the Red Room, whence he descended in a few minutes with a couple of rapiers under his arm. When he re-entered the room, he gave, as it seemed to us, the other man, his choice of weapons, and then he flung open the window, and after ceremoniously giving place to his opponent to pass out first, he walked forth into the night air, Claire and I following. We went through the garden and down a narrow winding walk to a smooth piece of turf, sheltered from the north by a plantation of young fir trees. It was a bright moonlit night by this time, and we could distinctly see Jeremy Lester measuring off the ground. "When you say 3, he said at last to the man whose back was still towards us. They had drawn lots for the ground, and the lot had fallen against Mr. Lester. He stood thus with the moonbeams falling upon him, and a handsomer feller I would never desire to behold. 1, began the other. 2. And before our kinsman had the slightest suspicion of his design, he was upon him, and his rapier through Jeremy Lester's breast. At the sight of that cowardly treachery, Claire screamed aloud. In a moment the combatants had disappeared. The moon was obscured behind a cloud, and we were standing in the shadow of the fir plantation, shivering with cold and terror. But we knew, at last, what had become of the late owner of the Martindale. That he had fallen, not in a fair fight, but foully murdered by a false friend. When late on Christmas morning I awoke, it was to see a white world, to behold the ground and trees and shrubs all laden and covered with snow. There was snow everywhere, such snow as no person could remember having fallen for 41 years. It was on such a Christmas as this that Mr. Jeremy disappeared, remarked the old sexton to my sister, who had insisted on dragging me through the snow to church, whereupon Claire fainted away and was carried into the vestry, where I made a full confession to the vicar of all we beheld the previous night. At first, that worthy individual rather inclined to treat the matter lightly, but when, a fortnight after, the snow melted away and the fir plantation came to be examined, he confessed there might be more things in heaven and earth than his limited philosophy had dreamed of. In a little dear space just within the plantation, Jeremy Lester's body was found. We knew it by the ring and the diamond buckles and the sparkling breastpin, and Mr. Cronson, who, in his capacity as magistrate, came over to inspect these relics, was visibly perturbed by my narrative. "Pray, Mr. Lester, did you in your dream see the face of the gentleman, your kinsman's opponent?" "No," I answered. "He sat and stood with his back to us all the time." "There's nothing more, of course, to be done in the matter," observed Mr. Cronson. "Nothing," I replied, and there the affair would doubtless have terminated, but that a few days afterwards, when we were dining at Cronson's Park, Claire, all of a sudden, dropped the glass of water she was carrying to her lips and exclaimed, "Look, John, there he is!" rose from her seat, and with a face as white as the tablecloth, pointed to a portrait hanging on the wall. "I saw him for an instant when he turned his head towards the door as Jeremy Lester left it," she explained. "That is he." Of what followed after this identification, I have only the vaguest recollections. Servants rushed hither and thither. Mrs. Cronson dropped off her chair into hysterics. The young ladies gathered round their mamma. Mr. Cronson, trembling like one in an ague fit, attempted some kind of an explanation while Claire kept praying to be taken away, only to be taken away. I took her away, not merely from Cronson's Park, but from Martindale. Before we left the latter place, however, I had an interview with Mr. Cronson, who said the portrait Claire had identified was that of his wife's father, the last person who saw Jeremy Lester alive. He's an old man now, finished Mr. Cronson, a man over 80, who has confessed everything to me. You won't bring further sorrow and disgrace upon us by making this matter public? I promised him I would keep silence, but the story gradually oozed out, and the Cronsons left the country. My sister never returned to Martindale. She married and is living in London. Though I assure her there is no strange noises in my house, she will not visit Belfordshire, where the little girl she wanted me so long ago to think of seriously is now my wife and the mother of my children. "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a louse. The traps were all set by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas would soon step there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while nightmares of body parts danced in their heads. And Mamma with her hatchet, and I with my axe, had just settled down for a little nightcap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my chair to see what made the splatter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters, and ripped through the sash. The moon on the breast of the blood-stained snow gave a hideous glow to objects below, when what to my wandering eye should appear, the watchman was dead with a knife in his ear. There, on the lawn, knelt a man rather thick. The blood on his coat told me he was St. Nick. More rapid than vultures he sprang to his feet. This zombified Santa was hungry for meat. Where are the children? I want them now. Bring them down to me, you ugly fat cow. On time and impatient I've come to your home. I hunger for brains, and I'm not alone. As dry leaves that before the wind hurricane fly, a legion of demons flew down from the sky, and up to the housetop this evil took roost, with red beady eyes and long pointy tooth. And then, in a heartbeat, I heard on the roof the digging and pawing of each demon hoof. As I drew in my hand and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came down with a growl. He was dressed in all the hair of the dead he had skinned, and his clothes were blood-stained from both women and men. With a bundle of cutlery hung on his back, he grabbed for a knife and began his attack. His eyes, they stared through me. His smile, scary. His nose was all wrinkled like an old rotten cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow. He slashed at my leg, and I fell to the floor. The stump of my limb he held tight in his teeth, and the blood seeped from it to white tile beneath. He had a cruel face and some blood in his beard. His expression was empty. For my life I now feared. He was ugly and evil, a sick little elf, and I knew things must change for my kids and myself. With my leg now missing, my wife surely dead, I pushed from the floor and kicked Nick in the head. He spoke not a word, but fell straight on his back, and all the traps sprung just thunderous snaps. Laying there writhing, right where he fell, this bastard passed right through the doorway of hell. The demons then vanished. My children were safe. I sat there crying, beginning to faint. But before I passed out, I screamed with all might, "Scary Christmas to all, and to all a good fright." All right, guys. That was it. And this is my little, I guess, holiday special kind of thing. Sorry I've not uploaded in a little while. I've been trying to get all my voice actors in a line for the next couple of my episodes, and still waiting to hear back from a few of them, and kind of just having to push through that. But I wanted to be able to. I don't think I did it last year, or yeah, I think last year was White Christmas that I did, the one about the family in Alabama that got the weird blizzard that kind of day after tomorrow kind of thing. Anyway, I want to wish everyone a happy and wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas, whatever it is. I'm average run of the mill American from the Southeast, so we celebrate Christmas, but happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever it is that you do. But yeah, hope everybody has a great holiday season, and we're pushing the end of the year. I may do an end of the year episode or something, but I just want to thank everybody, each and every one of you, who has followed along with this channel since it got going. It means the world to me, and I want to continue to bring you guys so much more. But yeah, we're just kind of on a little standstill with the Wicker Saga right now. I'm going to start trying to write more history and hauntings episodes, but not to continue to ramble. Again, happy holidays, everyone. Merry Christmas to my family, to my loved ones, and we're going to call it a night here. So let's keep that fire burning low. Good night, everyone.